Afghans are set to elect a president for the fourth time since the US-led invasion in 2001. But after the Taliban's repeated threats to blow up polling stations, will people choose to stay at home instead? I'm Imran Garda, and today's newsmaker is Afghanistan's presidential election. For Afghans, who are no strangers to pre-election violence, the last few weeks have been especially deadly. Scores of civilians have been killed and injured in multiple attacks, including one in a hospital, another during a campaign rally for President Ashraf Ghani, and even more following a US drone strike on a group of farmers. They were conducted after US President Donald Trump pulled the plug on year-long peace talks with the Taliban, citing the death of a US soldier in a suicide bombing as his reason for leaving the table. Ghani says elections need to happen before talks can resume, while others argue peace is paramount and the choice of who governs should come after that. But after nearly 2 decades of war, the real question is, will whoever wins be able to do the one thing nearly everyone in Afghanistan wants: end the war? Adam Pletz has more.
After being delayed twice, Afghanistan's presidential elections are due to take place on Saturday. Incumbent Ashraf Ghani's only credible challenger is Abdullah. The two ran against each other in the previous presidential elections in 2014. Both claimed victory, leading to a US-brokered national unity government, with Abdullah serving in the newly created chief executive post. But they often haven't seen eye to eye. One thing Ghani and Abdullah can agree on is that the stakes this time are higher than ever.
اشتراک شما خراب برادرها در این انتخابات در 6 میزان تاریخی است.
And with the Taliban resurgent, security is the most pressing issue.
God willing, we promise to provide security all across the country. We will bring peace with dignity and respect, which will be acceptable to all Afghans.
The Taliban openly aims to sabotage the election, and the campaign period has already been marred by violence. In response, the Interior Ministry plans to deploy 72,000 police officers to protect voters.
We are responsible for a safe and sound environment for our people across the country to come and vote.
But 1 in 3 polling stations, many of which are in Taliban territory, will not be open. And there are allegations that some of the closures are designed to deny Abdullah votes in areas where his support base is strong. Security concerns, compounded by voter apathy, are likely to lead to a low turnout.
Whoever I vote for, it'll be useless, and the security gets even worse. Who should we vote for? We can't trust anybody.
The winner will have to deal with the consequences of the derailed US-Taliban peace talks, and ultimately find an accommodation with the Taliban, which refuses to negotiate with any Afghan government until the US leaves. Adam Pletz, The Newsmakers.
So, will the elections be free, fair and safe? We'll ask Afghanistan's Consul General in Istanbul, Zakaria Barakzai, who joins us here in the studio. And Javed Faisal is in Kabul. He's a former deputy spokesman for the chief executive of Afghanistan, Abdullah. Nafai Chowdhury is in Cambridge, Massachusetts. He's a research fellow at the Afghan Institute for Strategic Studies. And in London is Rahila Siddiqui, founding director of the Farkhunda Trust for Afghan Women's Education. Good to have you all on the program. Looking forward to these varied perspectives. Zakaria Barakzai, as Consul General. Let me start with you, sir. Is it a difficult job for you right now? I'm trying to put myself in your shoes now. Ahead of these elections, trying to be optimistic about this democratic process when it's marred by violence and people maybe not showing up at the polls because they might get blown up by the Taliban.
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Many thanks for inviting me. My best regards to all guests gathering today for a special day for Afghanistan. I'm very optimistic because in 2014, many analysts were predicting that it will be violence because international forces are leaving Afghanistan. It will be low turnout, but Afghans showed that they love democracy, they love to be free, they love the values enshrined in our constitution, and they actually overwhelmed the record of 2004 when Afghanistan was peaceful in presidential elections. And this time around, Afghanistan is preparing itself for landmark elections.
Okay, but let's grant you that day was better than expected. But can you honestly say that everything between that day in 2014 and now was a success and an example of democracy in action?
I will not repeat what you already know about the formation of national unity government as a result of election crisis, but there are lessons learned from that, and we have institutions. We have Independent Election Commission of Afghanistan according to Article 156 of the Constitution who supervise the elections. We have Independent Complaints Commission, Electoral Complaints Commission, elected by all presidential candidates. And we have security forces responsible for security of vote. I'm very confident that tomorrow, by the help of international community, and particularly I want to quote Mr. Yamamoto, the Special Representative of United Nations, Secretary General of United Nations to Afghanistan to Security Council, that any attack on polling centers will be considered as war crime. So because of that, in the last 2 days, there were no incidents, and I'm hopeful that millions of Afghans will come and vote again.
Okay, curious to know if that means anything to the Taliban, if whether being called war criminals or not means anything to them and might deter them. We'll have to wait and see, and we have to hope that they don't attack anybody at the polls. Rahila Siddiqui, is this election at this time worth all the trouble?
This election is, I don't see it as a trouble. I am an optimistic women rights activist and social activist. Nothing is taken for granted, but I don't want to say that it will be trouble for Afghan people, because Afghan people, with all the trouble, they wanted to, they want democracy. They wanted to come for the elections, and over 9 million people have been registered for vote. And if I can tell you one example from Herat, almost 3 million women even been registered for vote. And in Jalalabad, where the a very not a very security area, but around 200,000 women has been registered for vote. So that means the people of Afghanistan and the citizens, they do like to see democracy, and the election is one of the pillars of democracy,
right.
And therefore they wanted to see that practice.
2 optimists out of 4 so far. Javed Faisal, there are those who say, well, why don't you sort out the peace process first? Get peace so that you can have a proper vote, that you can have a proper democratic process unhindered by the current insurgency and the current war. Are you one of them?
I think you should also add me to the list of the people who are optimistic. So we could be 3 out of the 4 here.
We have a majority. The election is set.
Because I believe the Afghan... Yes, it's a good sign for Afghanistan. We have the majority. At least us Afghans, we believe this is a good way that we have undertaken. Let's hope there are positive coming out of the other people too. So we Afghans here in Afghanistan, we see elections in peace process as 2 much needed processes that have to be followed accordingly next to one another. Because if in one hand, we have the peace process that could take us to a solution for our security situation. On the other hand, we have to have a political process, such as election, that could help us overcome the political tensions that we have in country. Or just to say that to have election for the political transition in Afghanistan, because there is no other way than elections to have that political transition. Let's assume that we have peace even tomorrow. What happens then? Don't we need to have an election as a country?
Okay.
Because the only solution.
Okay.
So if we are able to hold good elections and have an elected government, they can represent us better in the peace talks than not having a government or an elected government. I think an elected government can represent the Afghan people much better than anyone else, better than the Taliban or the US.
Okay.
That's why we see election as a much needed process that we have to undertake and continue to move forward.
Nafai Chowdhury, does Javed Faisal make a good point? A good, strong election means a government with a mandate, and maybe a strong mandate to go to the table, rather than the Americans going to the table with the Taliban, maybe a strong Afghan democratically elected government doing that talking during peace talks. Does that check out for you?
I think what first needs to be recognized is that the feeling going into these elections is very lukewarm. There has been a lot of concern over security now that the peace talks have fallen between the Taliban and the government. And in particular, people just don't know whether they're safe going out to the polls. They have been suffering a lot from insurgent attacks. There have been attacks in the past couple of weeks, and the Taliban have mentioned how they will be ramping up attacks leading into these elections. Furthermore, a lot of individuals are not sure what to think of these elections, with the peace talks having gone underway, even though now having been collapsed. What would have been the result from these, and to what extent there would be another caretaker arrangement that would be produced? But I think what's most important to remember about these elections as well is that there's a lot of general disillusionment from this being the fourth round of presidential elections, and the people of Afghanistan not seeing considerable improvement, in fact, only seeing the degeneracy of the economy as well as a lot of their livelihood. So a lot of people are hugely disillusioned, and it comes down to this one point that really this is a triumph of procedure rather than substance.
Okay.
So it is
an
election.
Let me pose that to
sense.
the Consul General. Procedure over substance. All the victories that you laid out at the beginning of this conversation, that's procedure, that's nice, that's bureaucratic procedure, but it's missing the point.
I want to remind our colleague, Mr. Chaudhry, that sitting in the United States and judging about Afghanistan is a difficult thing to do. The thing is that it's not a procedure, it's a value enshrined in our constitution. And Afghans showed that they will come up. Their fingers was caught in the Herat province in 2014, and they will show up again. And our brave security forces ensure the security of this round of elections. And it's not procedure, it's value, it's enshrined in our constitution, and Afghan people will come and vote despite all hurdles.
Okay, so somebody who's not sitting in the United States, somebody who was sitting in Kabul and facing the music is former President Hamid Karzai. Right? Okay. He's not a big fan of hosting these elections right now. Let's have a little listen to what he had to say recently.
Right now, our election, Kathy, is like asking a heart patient to join a marathon. We are in serious trouble. We can't run in the election.
Great analogy from Karzai. Wherever you stand on this, doesn't the man have a point? Now, it's great. This is wonderful, but is it really the best time to have these elections?
So I have great respect for former President Karzai because he started from scratch after collapse of Taliban regime in Afghanistan. He's a great statesman and a great friend and a great leader. But I would like to say that for peace process, as Mr. Faisal was indicating, you need mandate of people. When Taliban are nominating 7 people, a mandate of people with the government enshrined in the constitution, not procedure, a value. then determine the delegation who will contribute to the peace process. It's not hurdle to the peace process, and rather speed up the process of negotiating with Taliban if they wish to listen to voice of people, because the best estimates is that they have support of 10% of population, and their ideas of emirate is not Islamic, because if you see our fourth caliphs, they were not coming after Prophet Muhammad. They were just a moment, please. It's very important.
Okay.
Because our caliphs, Abu Bakr Siddiq, Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu, Osman and Ali, was not coming by sword. They were coming for bayat. And bayat, in our terms, is elections.
Okay, certainly. They might only have the ideological support of 10% of the population, but what is something that might be unpalatable to accept is that 2/3 of the country are either controlled or contested by them. And that's the whole point of this, right? That's why it makes it so difficult. They have guns and they have territory, and you've got to deal with them. And so they're playing spoilers in this election. They're saying, we don't recognize it. We're going to blow up these elections. We don't care that the Americans walked away from the peace process on the table. We don't want these elections. So even though 10,000 troops are trying to secure it, even though everybody around the world wants these elections to work well, do you accept that the Taliban has enough capability to play spoiler?
They can target soft targets like hospitals, some polling stations, but they are not able to stand against free will of Afghan people.
Javed Faisal, as we look at this, because you say that these things are sort of intertwined, right? The peace process is intertwined with the elections. When we look at geopolitically, the Americans will be watching this election, the Pakistanis will be watching this election, all sorts of parties will be watching this election. Do you think that they have preferred candidates? Do you think that the Americans, for example, would prefer an Ashraf Ghani over an Abdullah Abdullah? Help me understand who they might want to win.
Well, what we hope as the Afghan people is fair and free election. What we expect of our international partners is to support technically, and if we need to help us in the security sector. But right now, luckily, we don't need their assistance, even in the security front. So no intervention from the international partners and the allies will be our #1 wish on the list. But as I said, we will have to be seeking their support when needed, and we hope they will be able to deliver. But just to talk about the Taliban, I don't think there ever was a time in the last 19 years, when Taliban were friendly to the people's will or elections process or democracy at all. Their fear is from people. They cannot be part of such processes. They were threatening people in all past 6 elections we have had in Afghanistan. But people did show up. The turnout was massive every single time, and people responded positively. What we are hoping tomorrow for Afghanistan is that people will come out again. People will go out to cast their ballots and answer Taliban in this nice way, because we know it's a need. The Afghans know it is a need. Even former President Karzai knows it's a need. And he knows, like, during his time back in 2009, the situation was even worse. But we went to the elections because there is no other way around. And when we talk about values or when we talk about procedures, even call it a procedure, it's still a need for the country. Understood. We have to hold this. And even if you go to the peace talks, let's say that there is a progress in the peace talks, but there is no will from the Taliban. So why not hold something that is a reality than the fear that does not exist?
Right. Okay, good point. Rahila Siddiqui, who do you want to win? Who's best equipped to move Afghanistan forward?
First of all, as a woman that I have seen the progress in the past in Afghanistan, women more engagement in terms of in development process. The women that they have been in different positions in first time in the history of Afghanistan in the last decades, particularly in the last 5 years, I have seen I have to be honest to say, on the basis of the progress of women as a women rights activist, that women has been in different positions, from deputy ministers to ambassadors to different diplomatic places, positions. Women of Afghanistan would like somebody who is very capable technocrat to help the country in a way that not only in the locally but internationally support Afghanistan. Being able, we need a capable institution for Afghanistan to increase capability in the country for the development process.
Okay.
And therefore, among any of them, any technocrat who are capable and that who are acceptable for the citizen and to vote for him.
Right.
Unfortunately, there are no women candidates.
Right.
So for him, I would say, I would say that should be respected by the citizens and all the other candidates as well.
Okay. Nafai Chowdhury, at this particular time, we have the U.S. Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, saying we stand against those who exploit their positions of power and influence to deprive the Afghan people of the benefits of foreign assistance and a more prosperous future. At this moment, the U.S. talking about corruption, talking about the Afghans not using the money well, not using the aid well. Why is Pompeo doing that? Why is the Trump administration deciding to play that card right now?
There's been a lot of talk as to what it means that the United States has pulled out of these peace talks. I mean, has it been a strategic move on the part of the United States, or was it just a rash decision made by President Donald Trump? And we can't really read into that. What we do know is that there is disillusionment, and I wouldn't consider myself a pessimist, as some of the other speakers might imply. Rather, unfortunately, I'm more of a realist. I look at the statistics and I try to see what the trends are in elections. And we look at the 2004 elections, there were 70% voter turnout. It plummeted down to 33% in 2009, and it went back up to about 50% in 2014. But one consistent finding was that all of the candidates had to draw into their ethno-linguistic networks, and that's where you ended up having a lot of the votes. And so when we talk about triumph of procedure over triumph of substance, what it ends up meaning is that you don't have elected officials that cut across a broad base of voters. Rather, they're largely being supported by their own patronage networks, and that's the problem that the country faces.
Okay.
And so when there are claims that their money is not being spent, a lot of that has to do with the opaqueness in the actual government institutions.
And that's an interesting one. And yeah, certainly. And I want to jump in here for a second because we have 2.5 minutes left on the program. And I have one more question for the Consul General. It's something we've discussed on the show before. We've had, Ahmed Wali Masood in the past also discuss about how he's unhappy with the system of governance and he feels that certain ethnic groups are preferred over others and so on. It's almost a separate discussion that we'll have again another time. But Zakaria Barakzai, so we heard from Pompeo. We also saw you had a little snapback on Twitter at the US ambassador, talking about USAID. At this moment in time, the US has pulled out of peace talks with the Taliban. They're talking about suggesting the Afghan government is corrupt. They're suggesting the aid money is not being used properly. Are you disappointed in the United States?
Not at all, because United States is a country of institutions, first. The second is we have the Trump administration South Asia strategy. The centerpiece of that strategy is peace in Afghanistan. It's not only for Afghanistan, but for the entire region. Tweets, okay, sometimes some people are tweeting.
You seemed a bit angry in your response.
Yes, because we value the partnership with the United States, and United States have been the largest contributor for funding our elections among foreign countries. But the thing is that the free will of Afghan people is very important. In the silence period, 40 hours before the elections, a tweet can actually signal something wrong. And I think that it's painful in any country, like about Russian interference in US elections in a sovereign state. We value our partnership, and I hope that our partnership, strategic partnership with the United States will go ahead and strengthen day by day.
The Americans, the Pakistanis, and maybe to a lesser extent the Iranians and others are all watching closely. Your message to all of them is what?
Let the Afghan people to decide their future.
And do you think that they haven't let the Afghan people decide their future in the past?
I will urge them to let the Afghan people to elect their leaders and their destiny.
Well, it's a massive day ahead for the people of Afghanistan. And I apologize, time is our enemy, because I'm always annoyed that we always don't have enough time to give everybody as much of an opportunity as we'd like. But I thank you all so much. Zakaria Barakzai, Nafai Chowdhury, Javed Faisal, and Rahila Siddiqui. Great pleasure having you all with us here on the Newsmakers.
Thank you.
And thank you so much for joining us here on the Newsmakers. Bye-bye.